Got a lot of apologies to make.
Nothing's been the same since New York. You experience things, and then they're over. I can't sleep. And when I do, I have nightmares. Honestly, there's 100 people who want to kill me. I hope I can protect the one thing I can't live without.
Ladies, children, sheep. Some people call me a terrorist. I consider myself a teacher. Lesson number 1. Heroes. There is no such thing.
All right.
And holy shnikes, yes. Wow. Okay. So hold on. Sorry. It's phase 2 and we're trying out new things. And sometimes the tech helps and sometimes it doesn't. And this is one of those times that I'm not sure the tech did it. But hey, welcome everyone to the MCU ReVU. We are in phase 2. And I am Elliot Serrano. Right there is John Clark, and down there is Dave Pino. If you're watching us on the live stream, welcome. Thank you for watching us here on Facebook Live, YouTube, and Twitch TV. If you're listening to the audio podcast, then none of this pointing that I'm doing right now really matters.
We'll edit this out for the audio podcast.
Being said, audit it out for the audio podcast. That is correct. But today we are talking about Iron Man 3, the first film in Marvel Cinematic Universe's Phase 2. It would be the follow-up to The Avengers, which we spoke about in the last MCU ReVU. And we do have a guest, John. Who's our guest?
Yeah, I'm very excited to welcome our guest. He's an old friend of Caffeinated Comics. First met him as an indie filmmaker, and now he's the host of the Triviality podcast and the author of Being Patrick Swayze, which is a new book all about Patrick Swayze, which apparently everyone who knows Patrick Swayze is enamored with. So let's welcome Neil Fisher. Hey, Neil.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for being here.
Yeah, no, thank you. Love everything you guys do, and appreciate that wonderful intro. I never get to do this because it's never a visual medium, but here's the cover for you.
Oh, wow. That's as Swayze as you get.
Yes, very Swayze, very Dirty Dancing for the 35th anniversary this year, and I'm flanked by Dalton from Roadhouse behind me on my poster right here. So it's all Swayze tonight for you.
That's awesome. Well, and I'm sure we'll get into it as we go along, but first let's jump into the movie. This was written and directed by Shane Black, who Jon Favreau decided not to come back after the experience he had on Iron Man 2, but he did agree to come back as Happy Hogan. This movie went through several script revisions, including in production. Robert Downey Jr. was injured on set, and they had to shut down production. And during that time, Shane Black and Drew Pearce rewrote the script. And we can get into the many versions this was. This one was a big hit. It was the second for biggest moneymaker for 2013, crossed the $1 billion mark, but it wasn't without controversy. There's still a lot of people that rank this very low in the MCU, and there are a lot of people that rank it very high. This is also the last Iron Man film we will ever see Robert Downey Jr. in, although we were going to see him very often in the MCU until Avengers Endgame. So let's just jump right into it. What did you guys think rewatching it? Let's start with you, Neil. You're the guest.
Well, I'm a huge Shane Black fan. Love his writing, and I forgot about this movie. I've only seen it once in the theater, actually. So this was like the first time I've seen it since the theater, and I knew right away. Hearing that voiceover, knowing it reminded me right away, actually, of Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, just because I was, I'm a huge fan of that movie, and right, you hear Downey Jr.'s voice, and he's, being a little meta about it. But heard that, and then once I saw 1999 and heard Eiffel 65, I was like, I think I'm in, because that was the year I graduated grammar school. So I was like, I think I'll be back in this one. So it was nice to revisit it because it was something I'd really forgotten, to be honest.
Yeah, this movie is very Shane Black. And he was Robert Downey Jr.'s recommendation because of Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Once they had an opening in the director's seat, Downey really liked working with him in that movie, which is a really good movie, and recommended him for the job for Iron Man 3. Shane Black was a little reticent because he was stepping into the MCU, so he was paired up with Drew Pearce to make sure that everything was within the MCU. But yeah, we have a lot of Shane Black tropes. This could be a Shane Black drinking game because we have Christmas.
Yep.
We have supermodels as everything. We have basically Riggs and Murtaugh as Tony and Rhodey at the end of this movie. We have a twist. We have a lot of really sharp dialogue and a lot of, as you said, Drew, meta and self-conscious dialogue, I think. Dave, what do you think?
I tend to be someone who ranks this one closer to the upper end of the films as opposed to the lower end. It actually might be my favorite of the three Iron Man, maybe just edging out the first one. I like all three Iron Mans, but this one might just have a slight edge over the first one, even though the first one's the OG MCU film. I have a lot of fun with this one. There's a lot of great action scenes, a lot of great character moments. Everything with Robert Downey Jr., Tony Stark, and the little kid when he's stranded and he has to kind of work his way back up is really fun. I will say, and I noticed this, I think the first time I saw it in theaters when it first came out, I couldn't help but notice the similarity with Guy Pearce's villain character to Jim Carrey in Batman Forever. I was just thinking, he's this kind of awkward, unattractive, obsessive, nerdy guy who undergoes this transformation. He worships in Batman Forever. Obviously, it's Val Kilmer's Bruce Wayne, who's obviously obscenely wealthy and successful and handsome, and Edward Nygma is just obsessed with him, and he doesn't really have anything. He lives in this little hole, and then he goes through this whole transformation later where he becomes really powerful and undergoes like a makeover and everything. And I couldn't help but notice that similarity with what happens with Guy Pearce's character over the course of this movie. And because I have a big soft spot for Batman Forever, I appreciated that. It was a good thing. But no, I have a lot of fun with this movie. And I hadn't seen it in a while, so I had seen it since its original theatrical release a couple times, but there were some things I had forgotten about, like the whole big action sequence kind of in the climax where you see all the different Iron Man suits come out with the different variations, the different paint jobs and everything. That was really fun. I 2 thumbs up for this one.
It's funny that you mentioned Batman Forever because it's literally 1 degree of separation. Because Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, if you haven't seen it, is Robert Downey Jr. teaming with Val Kilmer.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a very clear connection between Batman Forever and Iron Man 3. Elliot?
Echoing a lot of things like Neil, I'm a big Shane Black fan. I think I've seen every Shane Black movie countless times, with the exception of Predators. I've yet to see his take on Predator.
I've seen it once.
Yeah.
I think Netflix had it for a little while.
Yeah. And I've just heard so many things. I don't want to spoil my affection. I don't want to taint my affection for Shane Black, who's really a very intelligent screenwriter. This movie, I remember when I went to the advanced screening of it, it screamed Kiss Kiss Bang Bang to me. It was the same plot device, just like in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Robert Downey Jr. is doing the narration, and it opened up going through here to there, blah, blah, blah. Even sets up that cute little post-credit scene at the end, which, was fun. Yes, the twists and the turns, all Riggs and Murtaugh. Not only that, but Shane Black loves having houses built on shorelines collapsing into the water. That he does that too. I'm thinking, oh, that's out of Lethal Weapon 2. Well, look at that. And
Los Angeles real estate's most hated man, apparently.
Yeah,
probably.
And considering he didn't design that house, because we see it in Iron Man 1 and 2, he must have been like, oh,
this is gonna be fun. Yeah. So yeah, and if anything, I do remember, and I'm sure John, too, as you were saying, why a lot of folks did not care for this film. And I'm going to be honest. When I saw Iron Man 3 the first time in the theater, I was a bit rankled. Why? I didn't care for the twist that they did with the Mandarin. While I saw, they were trying very hard to push the Mandarin character away from the stereotype that he had been known in the comics, they really they went all the way to the point where they essentially made the Mandarin a puppet of sorts. That would later be retconned in the Marvel one-shot called Hail to the King. That would be included on the Thor The Dark World Blu-ray. We'll be talking about Thor The Dark World next time.
And then that gets paid off in Shang-Chi, which comes much, much later. But Ben Kingsley returns for a feature film in that. Yeah, the Mandarins is a pretty controversial move, and they went through that's one of the things that they went through a lot of iterations with. I think Marvel really wanted the Mandarin, because the Mandarin's Iron Man's main villain, but if we're honest, and I'm a big fan of Iron Man in comics, Iron Man doesn't really have a lot of great villains. And I remember at the time, I went with the twist, especially because of Ben Kingsley's performance. That scene is one of the standouts in the whole movie.
Yeah.
Is when he makes the turn into just the drunken, pretentious actor. But I remember getting into arguments with people that summer. I was like, it was supposed to be the Mandarin. The Mandarin's the big Iron Man villain. And I would say, name me the best Mandarin story in the comics. Because there isn't one. Iron Man's not known for his extensive rogues gallery. So I feel like Shane Black was like, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it in a way that's going to make you mad that I did it.
Well, I'm sorry, but Iron Man had Titanium Man, Crimson Dynamo, Blizzard, Whiplash. I mean, I'm throwing them out. Although, was it that they made that joke in Black Widow, where one of the characters says, I'm Titanium Man. No, you're not. There is no Titanium Man.
Yeah, but what you're saying, Elliot, is Iron Man fought other Iron Mans. And I love Iron Man, and I love technology, and I love that it's technology versus technology. But pretty much every villain you mentioned is a guy in a suit. In fact, Ghost is an Iron Man villain, and they stole her for Ant-Man and the Wasp.
Well, yeah, and then, they took the Kingpin and they made him Daredevil's #1. So, bad guy. So
hey. Yeah, well, that was in the comic, and now the Kingpin's in Hawkeye.
Yeah, but no, you do have a point there. And again, while it rankled me then, all I know is that when I watched it this time, I just had more fun with it. I had more fun with the movie, and yes, especially the relationship that Tony has with the kid, who of course shows up in the funeral scene at the end of Endgame, and who I have a feeling is going to be returning for Armor Wars when that arrives on Disney Plus.
Oh, it's a good theory. Yeah, as I said, I like this movie. This is one of those flawed superhero movies, and I tend to have a lot of heart for them. I watched The Dark Knight Rises over the weekend because I'm very excited for Matt Reeves' Batman HBO Max, which I'm not watching now because we're doing this. But I was really excited, so I was like, you know what? Let me watch a Nolan again, and I haven't seen Rises as much. And Iron Man 3 reminds me of that, where it's a really good movie, but it's got some flaws that keep it from being great, and it's juggling so many things in the air that they don't all come together. There's some really major themes he plays with. I love the idea of Tony having PTSD, and it's handled very realistically. But I noticed in this watch, I was like, that plot has no resolution, and probably because it's going to get picked up for Age of Ultron. But it's almost like that's a really deep major plot that is started in Avengers and goes into Avengers, so we just mention it and go away. And then then we also have just Tony feeling his age. There's the theme that Tony is not his armors. So, which is why he does a lot of the stunts himself. He loses all his armors. He has the crappiest armor he ever designed in this. This thing doesn't work. And I have, for the Marvel Legends spot, this is the armor. This was released when Iron Man 3 came out. First of all, looks naked. When Age of Ultron comes, they use the same armor, but reverse the colors. So we don't see a pinkish hue to his crotch. And this never works. It doesn't work once.
Does it crumble if it hits something?
Yeah. The opening scene, it hurts him. So we're hobbling Iron Man going into it to prove that Tony's really the one in charge. And that does make it more human. I think that does keep it from being a CG fest that I think maybe Iron Man 2 leaned into.
That's a good point, because I think I do love all the stuff with Ty Simpkins with the kid, and as Elliot was saying, and I think there's a line in that scene where he's excited and he goes, "Oh, that's Iron Man." He's like, "No, I'm Iron Man."
Mm-hmm.
It's not the suit, it's me, which I could see that being a thread throughout the entire film. But I loved all the stuff with the kid. I thought Shane Black's so good with like adults who are crusty and angry talking to kids. Like Last Boy Scout's one of my favorites. So just kind of hearing that Bruce Willis dialogue there. But I thought it was interesting. A lot of the plot points, like you said, it sounds like they kind of just threw everything they could into the movie, if they knew it was their last or not, as far as the solo movie is concerned. But they definitely picked up a lot of different plots and themes. And like you said, some of them worked, some of them didn't. But, I'd rather have everything thrown at the wall and some of it not work than be underwhelming. So.
Yeah. And a lot of the plots, as we said, got changed and rewritten. Maya Hansen, who was played by Rebecca Hall in this movie, was supposed to be the main villain. And it was supposed to be revealed behind both the Mandarin and Killian. And Hasbro got upset. And they said, well, you can't make the villain a girl because that's going to hurt toy sales. Which is odd, because when Iron Man 3 came out, they didn't even make Killian. So, and I did feel that, like, she's dispatched really quickly. I felt like that was a quick rewrite. They were like, well, if she's not the main villain, I think we're going to just knock her off like out of nowhere as a shock. And there is a line at the end when Tony's saving Pepper. He says, "This is what you get for hanging out with my ex-girlfriends." And I'm like, oh, I think that was held over when they would both be fighting Maya and not Killian.
And of course, the Maya character was from the Warren Ellis miniseries that he did with Adi Granoff, Extremis, which is where they also get the main superpowers. Well, they tinkered with it a bit for the film. I was there going, it's so nice that Warren Ellis and Adi Granoff are finally getting some props for helping pretty much start up the Iron Man franchise as they did. They even named the president in this movie President Ellis.
Yeah.
Warren Ellis is a British citizen, so
Yeah, and Extremis is a great book, and not only does it introduce the idea of hacking your own DNA, which is the main villain, and you're right, Maya Hansen is in it, but it's also creates the idea of Tony hacking his own DNA. In the book, he uses Extremis to meet them, but he does the same thing where he injects his own body so the armor can be modular. And in fact, Warren Ellis says that the armor doesn't do all that much in that story. It's really Tony to make Tony more of a superhero. Unfortunately, we found out that Warren Ellis is a super creep, so it's kind of hard to talk about him now.
I'm still a Warren Ellis fan.
The work is good. I will say the work, you know what? And like, I put it in the category of Chevy Chase is funny.
Yeah. And what Tony's armor would do in Infinity War would be closer to what was going on with the armor in Extremis. So anyway, I'm talking a whole lot. We have a guest here who I'm sure has a lot to offer here. Neil, I just want to know, I mean, as kind of a fan of the MCU, what brings you into this whole, I mean, I'm a big comic book nerd, although I'm never going to find myself writing a book about Patrick Swayze like you did. How do you approach this type of material?
I do love the MCU. I mean, a lot of it has to do with, my brother's a big gamer, loves comic books. I read comic books a little bit when I was younger. I wasn't, into them as much as you. I was actually going to ask you a question, which we can get to in a minute, just kind of about the plot in this. But For me, I always come at it from a filmmaker angle. Like I love when the MCU hires filmmakers that I think are really interesting. I know is sort of a, for lack of a better word, is a huge corporate machine that some of the filmmakers don't get to do exactly what they want, that there's always, consolations to be made when it comes to the action sequences. They have other people doing them, but I do love seeing that. That's when I was excited when Jon Favreau did the first Iron Man. I thought it was such a fresh take, especially on a character that I knew a little bit about, but it wasn't, Captain America or someone that was on the tip of everyone's tongue. So the filmmaker angles really bring me into the MCU quite a bit. And also just, I'm a huge comedy fan. So anytime anything is injected with comedy and smart writing is always fun. And, I started watching comic book movies. Really, I watched Howard the Duck, honestly, about 5 times a day when I was a kid, like 1985, 1986. So I didn't even know he was a comic book character until I was about 5, but went back and read all those comic books and then the Turtles. And so I think that's kind of how I got into comic books, was not even looking at them as comic book movies that were based on pre-existing IP. So anytime that there's just an interesting filmmaker, an interesting story, I think it always kind of grabs me. That's why some of the MCU movies don't really work too well for me. I don't know if anyone here is a huge fan of it, but I didn't like The Dark World. I remember seeing that in the theaters. I almost said cinema there, even though you were talking about Warren Ellis being British, and I was like thinking of British terms. Anyway, I remember being excited for that one because the director had done some great Game of Thrones episodes, and it just didn't really land. But that's sort of how I got into it. And I'm not a huge comic book follower like you guys, but anytime someone can bring a storyline that is really interesting, I'll go back and I'll read those issues because I want to see who created it. And I always think that's fun.
Yeah. Neil, you mentioned that the filmmakers are really driving you into it. We're going chronologically. So, and you mentioned Jon Favreau, but we're going to get some really interesting ones like James Gunn and Taika Waititi. Yep. What would you say is your favorite MCU film?
Oh, that's a great question. It's funny. I think about this a lot when people talk about it. And for some reason, I don't know what it is about me. I love movies that are the first in the series for whatever reason. Like I know Godfather 2 might be considered more of or just a better film, filmically, artistically, whatever. But the first one is always a soft spot for me just because of Brando and James Caan. And same thing with Star Wars, the original trilogy. So, I really loved Captain America, the First Avenger, because I loved The Rocketeer. It was basically The Rocketeer, but with a character I didn't know much about, Captain America. And I thought Chris Evans was just perfect casting. I remember him, like so many other actors in these roles, Keaton with Batman or Ledger with Joker, that there was like not a huge outcry for Evans, but why are we picking Johnny Storm to be Captain America? He already did a Marvel character, but he ended up being perfect. And that one, I just love the combination of 1940s technology with sort of up and coming modern technology and just the use of the 40s and everything. So I think that might be my favorite. I remember seeing that one. I love Winter Soldier. It might be, it probably is a better film. But I just really love that one just for the nostalgia fact, I think. Yeah,
that's we covered that not too long ago. And Joe Johnston is really channeling his inner Spielberg.
He is.
As we talked about, he worked on Raiders and he brings that sensibility. And then also I forget, I always enjoy that more than I think I'm going to when I watch it. And I always forget Tommy Lee Jones is in it and Stanley Tucci's in it. And they have these fantastic moments, which are they remind me of the reason I like them in anything. It is a kind of a sleeper in the MCU.
It is. Well, that, and then, I mean, I love James Gunn's movies. I mean, I just think he's so good at bringing his own brand of humor inside the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which, like I was saying, it is kind of its own stratosphere. It's its own thing, but he's able to set it apart from all the other movies with his humor, with his originality, and I always find that refreshing. Same thing with Taika. I think, I don't think any of the other filmmakers, they could have gotten close, but probably wouldn't have made Ragnarok the same way. Same thing with Gunn, and that's always really interesting to me that they can keep reinventing themselves with these new filmmakers that they bring in. And keep it fresh, because I mean, it's a lot of movies. What is it at, like 23, 24 at this point? Or yeah. Same thing. It's just like Bond. I'm looking right behind David's head here. I mean, you get cool filmmakers and Bond's always going to be relevant. So
yeah, it's a shame of the filmmakers that didn't make it, as you said.
Yeah.
That, people like Edgar Wright and Patty Jenkins was originally supposed to do Dark World. And these were people that have done great films before and done great films after. But there's definitely a factoriness to the Marvel movies, which is why people like the Russo brothers excelled in that, because people that come from television know going in when they make a film, I'm not really the owner of this. The showrunner is the owner. And I can do things that make this a little different, and I can do things that make this a little more personal. But at the end of the day, it's never 100% my product. And I think a lot of filmmakers really rub up against that.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm sure it's intimidating too for some of the filmmakers, because when you're a director, if you've been doing it for a long time, someone like Edgar Wright, who I love too, I'm sure the creative differences were hard for him because he's been in complete control of all of his movies, editing, the writing, the directing, and probably being told, hey, this team over here is actually going to do the action sequences. Just don't worry about it. Go do the acting stuff. And well, he wants his fingerprint on everything, I would assume. So it's got to be intimidating for a filmmaker to exist in that world. But if you have a strong voice in the room and you have a unique identity, I think you're able to bridge that and then make your own individual movie, which, like so many of the good ones that we're talking about, they've been able to do.
Yeah. So as Shane Black fans, I think I want to ask everybody, what do you think the Shane Blackness is about this movie? That, it's definitely a different one than the rest of the MCU, but what do you see really popping where you go, yeah, that's definitely Shane Black?
Oh, do you want to start with me? I think, like Elliot was saying, you right off the bat, you get the voiceover, which is, just like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. He's so good with portions of dialogue that shouldn't really mean anything, but he throws like as many jokes as he can within a minute. There's one I'm thinking of now which I loved, when Tony is in the small town and he gets the Audi and he's about to leave, and him and Ty Simpkins are talking, and Ty Simpkins is trying to make him feel bad, like, I'm cold, or my dad left me, and he's just playing with them. And no other character would be, verbally telling a kid like, sorry, your dad left. But I mean, it's funny because you get, like, they have an understanding together, those two characters, they do that. And then I just love little moments, like really small things, which are just like visual gags, like when Tony lets in Rebecca Hall's character, and he says, oh, my relationship's going great, I'm a taken man, and the bags fall right in front of him. Just those little comedic moments. I love that kind of stuff. And then you get a femme fatale, which he does quite often. So yeah.
Elliot, what do you think?
Well, a lot of the same things. Again, Shane Black, here's the thing. Shane Black's dialogue, I've come to accept, works best when he's directing it, when he's directing the film, because the way it's read, the way, if you just read it, it can come off as totally different. I mean, like, look at Long Kiss Goodnight. Yeah. Which he did with Gina Davis and Rennie Harlan directing, and I'm there going, there are some scenes in there that are really cringy. That are really, really cringy. And then you go to Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, where there's a lot of dialogue that's very similar to what you've heard in Long Kiss Goodnight, or even like Last Boy Scout, which some folks have accused Last Boy Scout of being an incredibly misogynistic movie, which I can see. Why. Yeah. You could say the same thing about Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, but the tone is so different. The way the actors treat that dialogue and the way the scenes are set up, it's so different. You can tell, okay, this was the intent behind that dialogue, and really only Shane Black seems to be able to get it and make it effective. So all these things that were happening, again, all those scenes with Tony and the kid, someone be, man, why is Tony being such a jerk to this kid? But you're like, no, well, hey. Tony did not have a great relationship with his father either. He felt pretty much abandoned by his father as well. So he's telling this kid, hey, tough titties, kid. That's life.
There's a moment that I thought was really real when he's when Harley like breaks the finger off the armor, and he's like, I'm sorry, and Tony goes, are you? And it was like, first of all, it reminded me of a lot of things I've said to my sons, but it also was like, yeah, I think that might be like learned behavior. whether or not that was written, because a lot of it feels very Robert Downey Jr. as well. So a lot of it feels improv-y, but I would almost think that Shane Black kind of used the improv that felt the most like him. Although in terms of other directors, I mean, you have to remember he created Lethal Weapon, and Richard Donner did all those.
Yeah. Well, but Richard Donner also toned down a lot of this stuff, and he gave it his own spin. And Mel Gibson, Mel Gibson is what is it? What's that line? What's that line from the South Park special? Damn, that Gibson might be crazy, but he sure knows story. He knows story theory, something like that. I want to loop in Dave on this to get his Shane Blackness on this, but I got to ask everybody. All right, this is the elephant in the room for me. Iron Man 3, is it or is it not a Christmas movie?
I was going to ask that exact same question to three of you.
It is because Shane Black directed it, and they say Christmas about 5 times, but they spend all of their time in hot climates. They're in LA, which is the most LA I think the MCU ever went, and then they ended in Miami. So
They have Christmas in Miami, don't they?
Yeah, but they have December 25th there.
We needed the Christmas miracle of like Pitbull arriving. Then maybe it would have been a Christmas ending.
I'd love to see Pitbull just come in on a sleigh. I mean, yeah, we have a tree and we have like a giant bunny, which becomes a big argument.
There's some Christmas music at some point in this movie, or am I misremembering?
No, there's Christmas music.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
And when he goes to Tennessee, it's pretty cold, and the bar has like a lot of things up. But we don't have Christmas Day; it's just Christmas time.
Yeah. Well, we'll have this similar discussion when we get to No Way Home as well. Is that a Christmas movie?
Oh, well, No Way Home is and we'll talk about this when we get there. But No Way Home starts at Halloween, so it's a fall movie.
Yes. But then there's also Christmas later in the film.
Yeah, it goes from Halloween to Christmas.
Yeah.
So that movie takes like 2 months. But this is as much of a Christmas movie as everybody talks about Die Hard, but I feel like people don't talk about Gremlins enough. Gremlins, I think, is a real Christmas movie that comes out in the summer.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Batman Returns, Christmas movie that came out in the summer.
Which one?
Batman Returns.
Yeah. And Batman Returns is in my list with this movie and Dark Knight Rises of like, it's got flaws, but I just love it for its flaws.
Neil, I gotta ask.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Red Dawn. Is that a Christmas movie?
That's a good question. I don't. I guess not. No, I don't think I'd call that one a Christmas movie. Although, it doesn't have the shots of the Christmas trees in the background every so often, just to remind you, like this movie does. Just kind of like, hey, this is the final big battle, but here's some Christmas lights that are just kind of falling in the background. I don't think it's a Christmas movie. And what's funny about this movie now, you're making me think. I don't believe Disney Plus lists this under their holiday collection, which is, I guess, Disney doesn't believe it's a Christmas movie. But now that I'm thinking of the plot, Tony's past of Guy Pearce is coming back to haunt him, kind of like a Dickens movie. He deals with a kid, and there's some Christmas themes in there a little bit. So I think you could lean that way for sure.
And it starts with a flashback on New Year's, so even the flashback is the Christmassy themed.
Yeah.
Oh, and the flashback reminds me, there's a really weird point in this, which not a lot of people know, but there is a character that appears only in the beginning and the end of this version, but not in China. Is in the party in New Year's, Tony's introduced to a Chinese doctor who, like, he's drunk and he walks by and the guy just like makes a face, and he ends up being the guy that operates on him and finally removes the shrapnel. In China, he has an entire subplot of helping Tony Stark, because at this point, China was becoming such a big market that Marvel wanted to cater to them. And we'll see that. I mean, Shang-Chi was an attempt to do that as well, and it backfired on them because China basically accused them of yellow facing. But they created an entire storyline and shot a totally different storyline just to appeal to this market. And that's a question I want to ask the three of you guys. Okay, here's a question. Elliot, you asked, is this canon? Is this a Christmas movie? Is the China version canon? Because we've never seen it.
Like, I've got to ask, because I think that version is available somewhere, though. Can't you get it like on a region 4 DVD or something like that?
Yeah, I believe there's no English dialogue ever recorded for it.
All right. I mean, you know, stuff. It's the extra stuff, right? On the Blu-ray. You know, these are the scenes that could have been in there, so on. Do those scenes count in a film? Like when you look at the edited footage, does that count?
That's a great question, because there's so many times where the sequel will contradict the deleted scene.
Mm-hmm.
But just as often, there's a lot of movies where the deleted scene is my favorite scene. You know, or the director's cut has a scene that's not in the theatrical version. Spider-Man 2 is a great example. Spider-Man 2 has a moment when J. Jonah Jameson buys the Spider-Man suit that he actually puts it on. And J.K. Simmons is jumping on the desk and doing webs. That's not in the theatrical version, and it's in my head canon.
That is a great philosophical question, though. Like, are scenes on the cutting room floor considered canon if they're provided with the Blu-ray that you buy? I don't think so, but that's a really good argument, though. That I mean, maybe if you're, like you said, your personal headcanon, it could be. Yeah, man, that's a good question.
I'm trying to think of examples of that from Star Wars, because I know there are some. John, like you said,
A New Hope had lots and lots of scenes on Tatooine with
like with Biggs and all that stuff.
Yeah, it was like American Graffiti in the desert. And if you watch those scenes, nobody likes Luke.
Because he's even whinier in those versions than he is.
He's Anakin whiny in those.
Yeah. I was watching this and I'm going, my God, he's like early Richie Cunningham in this. Man, I mean, I can see why they cut it out. It was like they didn't even finish really processing the film, because whenever you look at whenever they show those deleted scenes, even on the special edition Blu-rays, it's all grainy and all. I'm like, man, they didn't even preserve this stuff. They just said, screw it, we're not using it. And later on, I went, no, collect it.
Yeah, well, every foot of frame from Star Wars is precious. Even though Marshall Lucas is the one that saved it by cutting it down and cutting it down and cutting it down.
I have a question for you guys. So I'm curious, not being familiar with the comic books, and I know you said some of this was Warren Ellis. When you saw the movie for the first time, I didn't know this at all until I researched it afterwards. But when you meet the character Killian, and he has the AIM, his company, do you know right away, oh, that's a bad company, he's a bad guy? Like, do you know that twist is coming with the Mandarin, or did Shane Black still surprise you guys as well?
No, I think partially because he runs AIM, and AIM was created by Stan Lee to be like the evil mad scientist group.
Okay.
And that goes back to early issues of Captain America and Iron Man. Also, the guy's name is Killian.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But yeah, in the comics, I will say Marvel really does play fast and loose with materials from the comics, just like the Bond producers do for all the Bond films, where they'll take all these different elements from the Ian Fleming books and they'll throw stuff around, mishmash it together, and go, okay, boom. So we do a show, Neil, called Shaken Not Heard, where Dave and I talk about the Bond movies as compared to the books. And
awesome.
As I've learned over time, because Dave is the big Bond expert on the show, I've learned, that's the same thing that they're doing with the comic books too. It's not like a direct, one-to-one translation, like let's say they're doing with the Harry Potter books. They're just pulling all these different elements from different stories in the comics and just making something new. So every once in a while you go, oh, cool, they did that. But that's not part of any story that this was in. It's from something else. Infinity War, they pulled so many different elements from so many different comics to put that movie together that you're like, it makes your head spin.
And there was a comic called The Infinity War, and there was also a comic called Civil War, and there was also a comic called Age of Ultron. None of the plots resemble those books in any way.
Nope.
Oh wow.
But I kind of like that because I've read a lot of Marvel comics, and I always, well, not anymore, but I used to go in expecting it to be like you said, like Harry Potter or like Lord of the Rings or Dune, where it's like, okay, you're going to reenact this book that I love, and then I'm going to judge it based on how well you did it. They always take these left turns that I can't guess them. I finally got a background because I'm sitting by a different wall. But you remind me that I have Mysterio up there, and Mysterio first appears in Spider-Man number 16. Stan Lee creates him. He's always known as a villain. But the way Jake Gyllenhaal played him and the fact that Marvel plays so fast and loose in Far From Home, which we'll get to, there's a while where I'm like, well, maybe he is a good character, So I love that they don't go just beat by beat.
That's a really great point because, and this is a kind of a random left turn, but over the pandemic, I got really obsessed with reading Agatha Christie novels. And I read like one a week or so just to kind of clear my head. But what I do is I read the book, there's a podcast about it, and then I watch all the film adaptations. And what's interesting about it is the Miss Marple character. There was a series they did in the 80s, and it's literally like every beat, every line almost beat for beat. And I'm watching, and it's almost kind of boring because it's like everything it's going to be. It's paint by numbers. And then the newer series that came out within the 2000s has some liberties. It changes things up a little bit, changes time periods. Doesn't really change sort of the reveals or anything like that, but changes enough where I'm like, okay, this is almost brand new to me. So I'm curious as fans as well, like, would you rather it be the way it is now, like with the MCU where they do play fast and loose, or would you rather it be super traditional?
Yeah, and this is the perfect movie to talk about it because that brings us back to the Mandarin.
Yeah,
the Mandarin was a Chinese warlord who found alien rings, and each ring had a different power, kind of like the Infinity Stones, and flies around and shoots freeze rays and tries to kidnap Iron Man, and that's what people thought Ben Kingsley was going to do. And that trailer, Elliot, I hadn't seen that trailer since the movie was out. They really make this thing out to be dark and serious and heavy, which is not really the tone of the movie at all. And when they do reveal that the Mandarin's just a puppet and just an image, a lot of fans got really upset and a lot of fans went with it. And I think it becomes a personal preference. I personally think it all depends on the execution. Like, I don't take the comic books as Bible. And now we're at the age where they're going to be rebooted so many times that, if I don't like this Batman, well, 10 years there'll be a new Batman. So I'm not so precious. So it's all about the execution. And in terms of the Mandarin, I really enjoy that turn. But Dave, what do you think as our also resident, not deep dive comic book person? The Mandarin in particular, how did that hit you?
I was totally fine with it because a big part of it because I love Ben Kingsley. And I thought that turn from being this serious, like, Bin Laden type terrorist mastermind to just being like a goofy, drunken British actor who just wants to drink and get some tail was hilarious. So I guess I could totally see as being, a sort of an outside, looking at it more objectively. If you do have a certain idea or image of what that character should be, and then they do something that kind of totally turns it on its head, how you can maybe, take some exception to that. But like with me, my comparison would be as a, Batman fan. Like if it was a villain that I really love, like a Mr. Freeze type character, or, Riddler or someone like that, one of my favorite Batman villains, and they just completely subverted my expectation of what the character should be and how he should be portrayed. I could see, I could imagine myself, being a little peeved at that. But with this being a character I didn't know as much about and really didn't have anything invested in, I just appreciated it for being this cool plot twist that it was.
Yeah, Dave, you totally put your finger on it because you mentioned the Riddler. As we mentioned in the beginning of this, the Matt Reeves Batman is on HBO Max. That they literally took the Riddler and really turned it on his head. So how did you like that version?
We could do a whole other podcast just to have my thoughts on the Batman, but I was cool with it. I I thought it's very different from what we'd seen before. In general, I was a big fan of the movie. I was a big fan of most of the things they did in that movie, though, and we've talked about this. This kind of circles back to the Bond discussion. At some point, I would like to see just a slightly lighter Batman. Like it's like every few years they're just going to keep rebooting it into like this dark abyss until that you can't come back from. But I would like to see it's like with Bond, like whatever the next iteration of Bond is, I would like not something silly. I'm not saying slapstick or goofy, but just something that maybe doesn't take itself quite as seriously. But I thought for a grounded version of Batman, which admittedly we've seen before. This is not the first serious Batman. We not that long ago we had the Christopher Nolan trilogy, and they just Warner Brothers seems to be committing to that idea that Batman has to exist in this real world outside of Superman and Wonder Woman, all those characters. I thought the way they handled the Riddler made a lot of sense for this type of movie. But just my personal taste is I would like at some point to go in a little bit lighter direction for both Batman and Bond.
Yeah, there's a great meme, Elliot. I think you may have posted it, but I know I reposted it, where they showed Batman's in a grid, and it was Adam West, Michael Keaton, Christian Bale, Robert Pattinson, and then just a black screen.
Batman's getting so dark, he'll just be a podcast, the next 10 years. No visuals, just audio.
Just an audio medium.
The movie will cost $16.95 because it'll just be. So it'll be Batman holding a flashlight under his chin going, "I'm very angry."
A friend of mine made this meme that went viral. I don't know, maybe you've seen it. It's the one of Dr. Manhattan. He's on Mars. Yeah, he goes, it's 1989 and there's a grim, dark reboot of Batman. It's 1999. There's been a grim, dark reboot of Batman. It's 2022 and there's been Doc Manhattan in the same spot. They just keep reboot after reboot.
Well, you know what gets lost in there because it's not live action. In between, well, we can, there's the Ben Affleck Batman, which that one personally offended me because he was running people over with the Batmobile and branding them. I forgot about that. But in between that, we had Will Arnett as Lego Batman, Dave. So if you want to like Batman,
yeah, it's not like you're completely you have no options as far as a lighter Batman. And they had like it's been a couple years, but they had the Brave and the Bold animated series, which was super fun.
That was really good.
As far as just a live action Batman, I would like something maybe a little not taking itself so seriously at some point.
Yeah. Although I really did like this new one, and I was shocked. I mean, because people really worship at the altar of Christopher Nolan. I think a little too much. I think. I think people like The Dark Knight a little too much, and they don't like Batman Begins enough. But that's my personal taste. But for somebody to have to follow that, with Ben Affleck never doing his Batman, I think we could just skip over that and be like, well, that's the Justice League. Yeah. Had Ben Affleck made his Batman, that would have followed Nolan, and then there would have been something else. But everybody looks at this as following Nolan, and it's measuring up.
Yeah,
I've got to ask Neil this question. You're an objective observer on all this, okay? Mm-hmm. So I'm pulling in all these disparate threads together.
The multiverse.
Chris Nolan.
Uh-huh.
Did you see Dunkirk? Have you seen Dunkirk?
I have, yep.
Okay. So tell me, Chris Nolan gave us a great Batman. And there's been all this talk about what's his face? Venom, Mad Max,
Tom
Hardy as Bruce as the new Bond. But after I saw Dunkirk, what do you think about Harry Styles as the new Bond?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, first, I think Tom Hardy's a great actor, but I also think he kind of relies on his grunting just a little too much for my taste in a lot of his roles, especially in the movie, and I can't even remember the name of it right now. It's where he's a moonshine peddler with Shia LaBeouf. But that's a good question. Well, if you don't know anything about me, I love a lot of different types of media, and I'm a massive boy band fan in general, mostly NSYNC, but I'm a big boy band fan. So that is an intriguing question. For Bond, I mean, it would definitely be a different type of Bond. It reminds me of like Young Indiana Jones with Sean Patrick Flannery or something.
There you go. Yeah.
Which that would be interesting. I mean, if you're going to bring in a new crop of audiences, that would be the way to do it. And I think I'd like to see it because, as we were talking about, I'm sure, I don't know if David would agree, but Bond is made to be reinvented, and it's really sort of the gold standard, or the original at least, of the cinematic universe. So why not just do it?
For folks who are listening to the audio podcast, I'm sorry, Dave. But for folks who are listening to the audio podcast and you're not watching the live stream like you really should, I have been pointing furiously in agreement with Neil about this whole thing. So seriously, folks, you got to listen to the live stream, watch the live stream. Go on, Dave.
I was going to say, Elliot's kind of not necessarily won me over with this idea, but I was never really against it. But I could say, I mean, if Christopher Nolan puts you in a movie, I mean, he has to, think fairly highly of you as an actor. So, and the thing is, it's like it's not like he's a teenager. I mean, he's almost 30, so it's not like he's a kid. I mean, he would definitely be the youngest guy to play Bond, but not by like a significant margin. I think Lazenby was the youngest, and he would only be maybe a year or two younger than him. But yeah, I think it's part of it is appealing to a younger audience. We've talked before on the Bond podcast, and in general, Bond, the films tend to appeal more towards a slightly older crowd compared to the Marvel movies and superhero movies in general, I think. But also to get a guy that you could see playing the role, see being in the role convincingly for like a decade plus and not aging out of him. Especially because now it takes like 5 years for them to make these movies, as opposed to the 60s, 70s, 80s. They were cranking them out every other year. So they would have to cast a guy you could start playing him at a young enough age. They could still play him for a long time, like Tom Holland as Peter Parker. I mean, the character is supposed to be younger, but he could still play him for many years and remain convincing in that role before he starts to like look his age, so to speak.
Yeah, I think you could be Spider-Man until you're 35.
Yeah.
And I think with Bond, and I know I've talked about this guys with you on your podcast, I feel like Bond's always been 35 to 50.
Yeah.
Once they hit 50, they're out. But you're right. We've never had a Bond under 30.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what David's talking about too is with Harry Styles, I think everyone just assumes he's younger because we have all these preconceived notions of him being a teenager when we first saw him on the scene. And I think, having someone like Nolan, like you said, if he thinks he's a good enough actor and he can, wrap a story around him, I think that'd be interesting, following him when he gets his 00 or something different, because I think with Bond, it's such a British institution and they love sort of their classic old school storylines. And I don't want to say upper crust, but just like things that are always the same, like they work. It'd be cool to shake it up a little bit. And bring something new to the character, because I love Bond, I love the character, and I mean, I'd like to see that. It'd just be something different. Yeah.
Well, speaking of reinvention, getting back to this movie, as we said, Shane Black kind of shook the tree before the trunk was very solid in the MCU. Before we wrap this up, I really want to talk about the ending of this movie, because I was in the theater. I was thrown by this because we have. Tony blows up all of his armors for Pepper, and then he drives off. And originally the line that Shane Black wrote was, "I am Tony Stark," which was going to pay off the first film. And then Marvel's like, no, you have to say "I am Iron Man" again. And I was always confused because even walking out of the theater, I'm like, well, that's not the end of Iron Man. I mean, he's going to be in Avengers. So I always wondered why Shane Black kind of tried to write a definitive ending for this. Do you think it was just because it was a trilogy, or do you think it was because he was putting his stamp on the character?
I would say that it was the end of a trilogy. It was like, I would say like Iron Man 3 is the epilogue to phase 1. You have your big, your resolution of the first phase with the Avengers. Just like No Way Home was the epilogue to Endgame.
Yeah,
So
Far
you
From
have-
Home.
Far From Home, sorry, is the epilogue to Endgame. So it's the whole, okay, let's see where things are and pick up from there. I will say I was a little bit, wow, wait a minute. They've always played this whole thing with Robert Downey Jr. Will he come back or won't he? Will he or won't he? Will he or won't he? I remember he was even saying during this time that he wanted to step back a bit and just make it like Tony Stark would be there, but kind of like as a background character consulting here and there. And but of course they would convince him to come back and do more.
Well,
But
he
it
would
was
play
always-
Tony Stark every year until I believe the only year he took off was 2009.
Yeah.
And he made Due Date with Zach Galifianakis, but he played Tony Stark at least in a cameo every single year until Endgame.
So
And I believe his original contract to play Tony Stark ended with this movie,
Mhm.
and then they, of course, convinced him to come back. So maybe this movie had the ending it did, so that if he didn't, and either they would have obviously they had every intention to keep Tony Stark as a part of the story, but if Robert Downey Jr. didn't come back, then this could be like his send off, like a nice little satisfying, right off into the sunset sort of moment, in case he didn't come back and they had to recast him for a future film, which obviously didn't happen. And to kind of tie it back to the Bond thing, it's like how Spectre has a little bit of an open-ended ending because they didn't know if Daniel Craig would come back. Where if he hadn't, it's kind of a satisfying ending, but thankfully he did, and we got a little bit more satisfying send-off for him with No Time to Die. But because they just didn't know, are we going to be able to convince our main star to return for another movie? If not, let's give an ending that could be, if it doesn't kind of go the way we want it to, could be a satisfying send-off for the character and the actor.
That's a great point, David. I never thought of that, because the other thing you're reminding me of is behind the scenes, we are still dealing with Ike Perlmutter. And if you don't know who Ike Perlmutter is, he was a venture capitalist and billionaire who bought Marvel around the time they were in bankruptcy. So he still had a very big stake in Marvel. At this point, Disney did not own it. And as a Bezos-style millionaire, he was very, very cheap. When there were massive layoffs at Marvel when he took over in the mid-90s, and he did not want to pay actors very much. And there was a lot of arguing between Kevin Feige and Ike Perlmutter about Robert Downey Jr.'s salary. And I think you make a great point, because we were talking about this with Iron Man 2, but it's really strong in here, is Robert Downey Jr. is a movie star in this movie. Mm-hmm. In Iron Man 1, he's playing a character. In Iron Man 2, there's this rush of like, wow, we're really successful. He's an established movie star. He knows he owns the screen. He knows how to command it. He knows what he can get away with. And he starts to command a movie star salary. And Ike Perlmutter did not want to pay that. And what will eventually happen is that when Disney buys it, Feige goes to Disney and says, can we pay him off and get rid of him? And then once that happens, then you start to see like Glenn Close in Guardians of the Galaxy, and Sylvester Stallone, and and you start hearing like the Beatles in movies. Like the financial cap comes right off once he's removed. So I think you might have a really, really good point, Dave.
They're going to pay for the music rights for Immigrant Son, no problem.
Yeah,
and
yeah, right.
Now they just got Guns N' Roses in the new Thor
trailer today.
So Axl Rose and Slash are like, sweet.
And Led Zeppelin is the most notorious for licensing their music. You never hear Led Zeppelin songs. There was, if you remember School of Rock, there's a scene where Jack Black plays the Immigrant Song. They had to shoot a special scene at the Battle of the Bands begging Jimmy Page to license it. And Jack Black had the entire audience and the band in there going like, please, Jimmy Page, and like begged him to put that in. And it's just playing in the car. So for Marvel to go like, we're going to put this in a fight scene.
Well, we've come a long way, I think, because I just literally last weekend I watched Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. With David Hasselhoff, and seeing that movie to where we're at now, I mean, it's insane. Like I don't think I could have seen that, and you all grew up with the comics, so yeah, it's just amazing what they've done in the span of 20 years basically.
I will say, I remember that. It's surprisingly faithful to the comics. It is surprisingly, because David Hasselhoff was a big fan of the comics and he wanted to keep it.
Yeah.
The problem was the budget was just so threadbare. You couldn't, Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., you need the helicarrier, you need this cool gadgets, you need the big, cool, the flying cars, the fight scenes. He couldn't get any of that, on that budget. But
and also, Ellie, at the time it was made, you couldn't do that on television anyway. The best production values you had at that time were Star Trek: The Next Generation, which hold up, but they're not Loki.
True. Also,
we would be 20 years from being able to do that.
Yeah, Star Trek Next Generation at that time would go down as the most expensive show to produce per episode.
Yeah, I think it was $1 million in the 80s.
Yeah, per episode, which at that point is unheard of. Now that's nothing. But
yeah, I wonder how much. That's a good question. I wonder how much Picard costs.
Oh, I'm way beyond that. Yeah, it's sure way more than that.
Yeah.
Well, I know Dave and has got to go, and Neil, we don't want to keep you all night, but before you go, Neil, I did want to hear a little bit more about your book.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, I want to check out the Bond podcast because I'm a huge Bond fan. I'm going to listen to all of them now. I'm going to be subscribed as soon as we're done here. If you ever need a guest, let me know, and I'll need to talk to Dave specifically, I guess both of you specifically, because I have a trivia podcast called Triviality, and we've had issues before where people will write a question, very great of them to do that, but they include Diamonds Are Forever as canon. And I usually say, no, it's not. So I'll have to get your official answer on that so I can tell them the official podcast answer to that question.
That sounds like an entire podcast.
Yeah, right.
Wait, are we talking Diamonds Are Forever or Never Say Never Again?
Or I'm sorry, Never Say Never Again. My bad.
All right.
Because Diamonds Are Forever is not good.
No, it's still canon, but maybe not the best. But yeah, Never Say Never Again. Yeah.
Right.
So I'll have to get the answer to that. But so the book, it's called Being Patrick Swayze, Essential Teachings from the Master of the Mullet. It's my comedic love letter to the life and career of Patrick Swayze. What I did was I wanted to create a book that was really accessible to a younger generation who maybe didn't know a lot about him. And then also have a lot of Easter eggs for people who are fans of all of his movies and everything he did on and off screen. So what I did was created this book that has essays sort of about him, his life, how he approached his roles. It has games, trivia, quizzes, and then it's just full of just like really cool illustrations that this illustrator, Kyle Hilton, did for us. And I'm just super grateful that he was able to work on it because it kind of makes it a different book. It's sort of like a classic gift book. And I just tried to make it something different than you normally see. It's really beautiful, glossy pages, different iterations of Swayze. And as you said at the top, I was very grateful to have a bunch of his collaborators check out the book early and say some nice words about it. So I'm just hopeful that if you're a fan of movies, if you're a pop culture nerd like I am, and you want to either get someone a gift or just want to have something for your coffee table, that's why I created it for. So hopefully you enjoyed it. It comes out April 26th.
Great. So next week, it'll come out around the time the audio podcast will come out.
Oh, wonderful.
Only week. And I'm guessing it'll be available on Amazon and anywhere you can find print books.
Yeah. Yep, it's going to be available worldwide. It'll be Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, all your local indie bookshops. So if you want to shop indie to help out the local bookstores, that'd be great. But if you can't, it'll be available on Prime for Amazon. And
how do we find Triviality Podcast? And you and I talk on Twitter. And how do we find you there?
So Triviality Podcast on all your favorite podcast apps. You can go to trivialitypodcast.com if you'd like to learn a little bit more. And as far as social media, I'm at Neil E. Fisher. It's NEALEFISCHER. And you can take that name and put .com on it. And you find my website there with my reel and a bunch of extra stuff about the book.
Well, it's always good to talk to you, Neil. It's been way too long.
Yes.
And thanks for coming on. You can find me at Not In My Book on Twitter and Instagram. You can also listen. If you're listening now, you're listening to the Captainated Comics podcast, which is now about 8 years old. And you can follow our Facebook page, facebook.com/Captainated Comics, where we live stream this, as well as on the MCU ReVU page. Dave?
I am on Instagram at Pinto_Noir.
And Elliot, if you would be the Chinese doctor who removes the shrapnel from our heart and takes the iconic arc reactor out of our chest for no real reason, take us home.
Just to be cut out later
as
on,
Tony
right?
says when he releases all the armors, Take us to church.
Take us out. Take it. Yeah. Well, of course. First off, Neil, you can check out Dave and everyone listening. You can check out our podcast or our fan cast, the Shaken Not Heard. We call it Shaken Not Heard, the James Bond podcast that no one listens to. You can
But
see.
Neil will.
I am. I'm subscribing right now. If you can see on camera, that's what I'm doing.
Appreciate
So
that. You can go to facebook.com/shaken not heard. You can also find us on YouTube at shaken not heard /C. I'm sorry, youtube.com/C/shaken not heard. You can also find us on Twitch TV, but that archive doesn't keep as long. But if you go to facebook.com, you will find every episode where Dave and I talk about the James Bond films from Dr. No all the way through No Time to Die. Folks keep asking, will there be other episodes? Yes, there will. In fact, Dave and I are going to be talking soon about the 60th anniversary of Bond and going to a anniversary screening of Dr. No.
ooh.
You can also, of course, check out the MCU ReVU, facebook.com/MCU ReVU, twitch.tv /MCU ReVU to watch all the live streams. And of course, tell your smart speaker to play the Caffeinated Comics podcast, where you can hear not only episodes of Caffeinated Comics where they talk about news and reviews of everything going on in the worlds of comics, but every other episode is an MCU ReVU special.
And good night.
And good night, everyone. I was waiting for you to bring us home, Sean.
I told you to bring us home.
Bring
This
us
is
home.
getting cut out of the audio.
Yeah, you just get that out, right?
I will say, so a mutual friend of all of ours, David Navarez, if you go to my site, neilefisher.com/books, which is where you'll find out about this book, you'll see a video of us from like 10 or 12 years ago doing the Dirty Dancing lift. So there's
Sweet.
a little blackmail material for you.
You've had some interesting folks do quotes for your book jacket, right?
Yes. Yeah. We had his widow did a quote, which was great, Lisa Niemi Swayze. And then, Thomas Lennon, writer and actor, Marshall Teague and Rowdy Harrington.
In Dark Knight Rises.
Yep,
That's right.
I saw the Thomas Lennon one. I think I saw it on. Did you share it on Twitter?
Yes, on Twitter. Yep.
I think I saw that one. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Really, really nice that they took the time to do that, and took a while to get the book to different people, but happy they read it. So, yeah.
Hey, congrats! It's great.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And we appreciate you coming on and talking with us, jibber jabbering with us for a bit.
Oh no, of course. I have a page of notes in case I don't know how deep dive you were going to get, so I was all ready. But no, anytime you need someone, let me know. I love listening to all the programs you all do, and John just for having me on the show a bunch of times before. But big fans of what you do. I just followed Shaken Not Heard. Can't wait to listen to that. And I'm just excited.
It takes us a while to find ourselves in the beginning. I always tell folks, when you watch the very first episode that Dave and I do, neither of us have really interesting backgrounds on the video, and I don't have a ring light. So as the show progresses, I slowly recede into darkness.
Like Batman. Yeah, right.
Yeah. But we really find ourselves as we go along. And we have a lot of great guests. John's on. We have some other folks, big Bond fans, and folks from the Ultimate Bond cast.
That's awesome.
Come on. So we have fun with it as we go. We'd love to have you on too. So
yeah, no, it'd be fun. I'd love to talk about that. I'm curious about your opinions on the end of No Time to Die, and because I didn't read any spoilers before I saw the movie or any inklings of spoilers, so it was interesting to see that live when I was watching.
Yeah,
it was funny because when we were at the theater, and again we hadn't seen it, and we were at it was supposed to be the premiere, like the Thursday night before we're supposed to premiere, and Dave and I are sitting in the theater, and it's him, his friend, and his wife, and we're talking over everybody, between us, and I go, now you've seen it, right, Neil?
Yes, I've seen it. Yeah.
Okay. I go to him, I go, well, if this really is the last one, he's got to die, doesn't he? And then I'm like, called it. I thought it was I know so many people who didn't like it because of that. Yeah. I thought it was perfect. I thought it was the perfect. It was, to me, it was like a Dark Knight Rises, where you think Batman's going to die at the end. You
Yeah.
know,
I
In
thought it was
fact-
their one chance to do that.
yeah,
Right.
You
They
know,
had that
they've
free
never done
pass.
it before. They're like, Daniel Craig went into this saying this is the end. It's like, well, then let's just do it.
yeah.
And it said, well, then make room for Harry Styles.
There you go.
The more and Neil, you hit the nail right on the head. I've been saying that as far as having Harry Styles played Bond or a young Bond, as you were saying.
Yeah.
To me, it's like, yeah, have him like as he's. It's even like before he even has his 00. Because we did. The Daniel Craig was him just earning his 00 rank. At the beginning of Casino Royale, so you just have him like. He's working his way up the ranks, getting just the formation of Bond. And then you can have him, boom, he's finally the Bond we want. Like they've said they did with Tom Holland in the Spider-Man trilogy, where it was really, he isn't really Spider-Man until that last Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, Marvel said that the trilogy is the origin story.
Yeah.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing. It makes me think of Sherlock Holmes, a character that I love too. I mean, it was always just old dudes. And then, you make it Benedict Cumberbatch, and it releases a whole new fandom and a whole new opportunity for stories. So
you make it Benedict Cumberbatch and Robert Downey Jr. at the same time.
Yeah, right. Very different interpretations of it too, which was fun. I remember seeing that one in the theater, the Guy Ritchie one, and I knew it was going to be Guy Ritchie, but I was like, man, he really went all Guy Ritchie, full Guy Ritchie, like Robert Downey Jr. in Tropic Thunder. So.
They're still talking about a third one that kept getting pushed back because of Marvel.
Yeah, I heard that too. I'm curious I think I just heard actually that Downey Jr. is going to produce a TV version of it, and I don't know if he'll be in it, but they said he was going to put his name on it, so I'm not sure where that's going to go.
Yeah, the Cumberbatch one was never canceled, but nobody thinks that Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch are going to have time to do another season. And I did a rewatch of that 6 months ago, and it's enjoyable, but there's a sharp drop off after season 2.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, actually, it's funny. I get a lot of flack for this because I love Sherlock, the character. I really liked Elementary with Lucy Liu. I just thought it was a really cool reinvention of the characters, and I love procedural television on a certain level if it's detective stories, because I know what it takes to like write a procedural pilot or something, and I'm always curious to see how the writer's room is going to take what is going to be the same formula every episode and make it interesting. So that was kind of cool with Sherlock. So.
And we've been recording this whole time, so I'm just.
Yeah, are we still broadcasting? Like, are people watching this?
No one's. No, there's still people watching. I did not realize that we didn't end the broadcast.
Crap.
All right. So really,